So as we note here on the very first slide, this is what we're calling a beta release, or a beta release, in that the site is pretty much set, certainly the structure, but we've deliberately set it up to be expandable, and we think we've got a good organization, and we're at a phase now of interacting with others to add value to the site. And so I'll explain that as we move ahead. Okay, in terms of context then, I think you're all aware of this, that the OSHCO guideline back in 2005, process was set in place to create some guidelines for Ontario. And the goal then was to create resources for the health and safety system so they could all play from the same, sing from the same songbook. Now it was published 2007, 2008. And it was always intended that further documents would arise from it, and it would be reviewed in 5 years' time. That didn't happen. And so we were asked back in 2015-16 to have an update of the guidelines. So CRE-MSD moved ahead with that. And the goals of the project, as you can see here, and I'm not going to read them, you can read better than I can speak today, was to look at the strengths and limitations of the existing guideline and to bring up to date processes, information, create content, and test them. And since I think I've talked to most of you, we've had 2 further phases in that our funder, the Ministry of Labour, has provided resources to create a standalone website. And very, very recently to develop new resources for that website. So again, very briefly, a whole bunch of activities, and many of you have been involved in that, so thank you. But there were 2 things that we spent more time than in retrospect I ever believed we would. And that was the issue of micro businesses and small businesses. And the other one was process. And as you probably know, the issue of management systems, participative economics, and issues around there, and how we could square the circle with participative economics being a dominant feature of MSD prevention. And in most other areas, management systems were. So in terms of a timeline, we have chugged along, as you can see, from 2016. But what I do want to note is how very recent some of the funding has been put in place for this. And so in an ideal world, we would have had a complete website today, but it's still being developed. But I think I'm happy with where we've got. So main findings, and I just want to bring you up to date on this one, because I think this is critical for when we actually get into the website itself. Small business, an underserviced community in all kinds of ways.
Small intervention.
That's okay.
Just can come this close, and then you have to come this close.
Well, I wouldn't come this close to me, so it won't go up anymore.
He's not afraid to get a cold.
Okay. And so the idea of it that couldn't be a one-size-fits-all came up. Business processes and how the guideline fitted or didn't fit was something that came up again and again in our interviews with a whole range of people. Participation of workers was brought up. There was a general feeling that standards as currently available were too complex and unavailable and inaccessible to most workplaces. And the second one was, excuse me, be solutions oriented and don't assume any familiarity at all. So as we found when we were talking with micro businesses, MSD was And material safety data sheets, I got those. And so the terminology that we're happy with, hazards, hierarchy of controls, was absolutely inaccessible to most people. So how did we address the needs? So a couple of points. The first 1 and 2, we realized we needed multiple versions. And the 3 versions were what we call the Quick Start Guide, the Basic, and the Comprehensive. And I'll go into those when we actually get to the website. But basically, the Basic was what, the Quick Start Guide was what we used with micro businesses. The second point about the 3 versions was their scalability. And so what I have here are 3 versions: Quick Start Guideline, Basic Guideline, Comprehensive. And the Quick Start Guideline has 10 steps, the Basic and the Comprehensive. But in this step 3 here, you can see that there's a difference as we move from the Basic to the Comprehensive in terms of more detail. And so this Comprehensive is very, very like a management system like CSA Z1000, ISO 4501, etc. Better integration with business processes, Plan, Do, Check, Act, Occupational Health and Safety Management Systems. And so, again, that 10 steps we generated were the same as any other management system that you can find. They're not necessarily in 10 steps, but all of the elements you would find in a management system are within those 10 steps: Plan, Do, Check, Act. Workers' participation, absolutely critical. And we made the point that workers' participation is important in all occupational health and safety and in organizational success in general. But with MSD prevention, because workers actually feel the hazards through fatigue, through effort, they have information nobody else has. Nobody else in the workplace has. Standards are too complex. We think we've addressed some of that through the 3 versions. And we've tried to address the familiarity with what we're calling the Quick Start Guide. So that was the kind of development process of the content. And since Christmas, I would say, we've been working on the website. And the needs for the website were, as you can see here, we definitely wanted multiple entry points to it. By stakeholder, a worker, for example, only has very different needs than a manager. And because there are others who are involved with MSD prevention, whether they know it or not, such as engineers, we provided an entry point for them, as well as for healthcare professionals. By level of detail, our Quick Start Guide, Basic, Comprehensive. By whether you're more interested in process or risk assessment. And we also then gave an overview with a video on the homepage, which is currently in production. Searchable resources, as you might expect. And help in the selection of assessment tools for people who are not as familiar, perhaps, as others with identification of hazards for MSDs and risk assessment. The second point you can see here is many people have told us that they have based their training and perhaps even practice around the existing guideline. And so we've incorporated all of that material around resources. As you can see, we have different process, and so that has and not reproduced, but all of the resources and much of the content is in here. We found in terms of identification of hazards when we were interviewing small business that their ideas about what was hard on the body was actually quite negligible. And so for many reasons we thought that better identification of MSD hazards was necessary, and so we are creating some videos around that as well as the homepage videos. Accessibility compliant, and that's where we're spending time converting a lot of the resources in the current website to accessible versions. And responsive, it's available on any format of device, from phones to laptops. So that was what the needs, so to speak, were. And so as of yesterday, we were at that orange place, which was the beta release, and I think many of you know that we had a conference up at the airport where we released this. And so what I wanted to do is show you how we converted the information and the needs into a website to provide accessibility to the different kinds of information. So we've got a number of items down the left-hand side in terms of some narrative description of what are MSDs. One of the core pieces is what we call Prevent MSDs, where we have the 3 versions. Dealing with an MSD is a piece that we're working on now, which is what does a workplace do when they get a reported MSD? Because people told us that they needed to have that primary, secondary linkage. And stakeholders, some information for different kinds of people. So the MSD risk assessment, and so we've condensed that into the recognize, assess, control, evaluate cycle. And then we have MSD hazards, which is a much more in-depth look at MSD hazards, and a tool picker, which I'll get to. The 4th section, which is blocked off from the website because it's not complete, is the controls piece, which is a really important part of the website. And lastly, a resource library. And we've got access to some of those things up at the top as well as the search function. So below the fold, go back to here. We've got different ways of accessing that. We've got a quick start guide, the basic and comprehensive, and then down the left we've got what's new, introductory fact sheets, and success stories, and frequently asked questions. So a description of different kinds of MSDs. This is not active yet. One of the graphics in phase 2. It's clickable to look at different kinds of MSDs. Work in MSD hazards, descriptive information, and we've made extensive use of expanding lists to try and condense some of the materials. So, and a note on psychosocial hazards, and then some ideas about workplace prevention, where we talk about race, we talk about the idea of root cause analysis, and whether you would, how you might go about thinking about MSDs. And this is partially based on our reviews of the micro businesses who thought they knew everything about MSDs and would suggest proper lifting was the way to go. So we definitely wanted to set out right from the beginning to talk about root cause analysis. And what are the underlying factors driving perhaps these MSD hazards? So, workers' participation and organizational level activities. A short section, and without links to other particular resources. Prevent MSD, I think, is one of the chunkier sites. Oops. Sorry, chunkier ones. Come on. But before I do that, let me click on the, why isn't it? So the first part is to select the appropriate guideline. So as you know, there's quick start, basic and comprehensive. So the quick start is designed for our small and micro businesses. And you can see as well as I can read, better probably, what the basic and the comprehensive guidelines are set up to do. So one of the things that happened during our micro-business interactions, and the Ministry of Labor runs a summer student outreach program where they send students out to small business throughout the province. And they've been visiting typically 10,000 small businesses a year in the summer. And so for the last 2 years, we've actually piggybacked onto that and trialed and refined what we call our Quick Start Guide. And the Quick Start Guide comprises a folder, 7 mini posters, and a full-size poster. And the things that you're actually seeing also have what we call, for lack of a better word, fact sheets. And so this was the package that we trialed, not in 10,000. And what you see is the latest iteration of that. And I'm happy to talk about why we did what we did at the end. But for now, I'm just going to move on. So when we get to the comprehensive guide, let's miss out the basic, it's kind of intermediate. Okay, so we've got the classic steps. So some actions within each one. And then as we go down, we end up with the how to do it. And this is where the resources get plugged in. Into the process anyway. And the goal would be to have any section in this general health and safety management system. This is not an MSD prevention. This is a general health and safety management system. But where it has phrases such as including MSDs, or don't forget MSDs, and if there is something special about MSD in terms of how you would include it, then we would add a resource at that point. And so we chug on down through here. And remember, this is the comprehensive guideline, and so this would be for a company that's already familiar with all of these things. There's not, I don't think you jump into this right off the bat. Okay, I'm just going to jump down here to MSD risk assessment. And this section is basically MSD specific. This is where the musculoskeletal disorder content tends to be concentrated. And so within here we've got 4 main sections. I'm doing my Mac clicks, that's the problem. So recognize, assess, control, evaluate process. And then drop down menus for the different parts of that. So this is preparation. simple risk assessment, full risk assessment. And so those things in blue are those things that are MSD, more MSD specific, although root cause analysis is not. We talk about work observation, who we're going to look at, when we're going to look at it. So in terms of posture, we would look at the different segments of the body that we're interested in. So if we're interested in hand wrist, have a look at hand wrist posture. And this is an example of what we're creating. And so I'm going to have to tab over to our animations here. So right now it just says video link and PDF link. So these are the first rough cuts from the animators. So in terms of how might you place a keyboard in different. So we have the animation set up with to do all major joints now with this kind of green, yellow, orange approach. But these are the only 3 that have been started since last week when we got money. So in terms of stakeholders, let's have a look what we think an engineering professional might be interested in. We mentioned that the Quick Start Guide might be of interest as something that's in non-technical language. We talk a little bit about engineers making sure to get good information into their Six Sigma teams. We talk about guideline processes based on management systems. And we have some other information here that will grow in time, which is other resources that may be of interest to engineers. So for employers, certainly a reminder about the Occupational Health and Safety Act, internal responsibility system, linked to, and some fast facts just to that we thought were important to grasp. So for an employer, we thought it important to say that work has a separate and independent contribution to the development of MSDs, and that component could be addressed. A warning about personal protective equipment, for example, and again some things that an employer might be interested in, Quick Start Guide, guideline processes, and what I expect is a growing list of resources that the employer may be interested in. Let's have a look at one part that was really fun to create. Now, the methods to identify risks for hazards for MSDs are growing, and there's a lot of them out there, which is good in some ways. But sometimes there's too many. And even for ergonomists, there may be value in some guidance. And so we took a leaf out of the work of a master's student working with Dr. Jim Potvin in Ford, where they came up with a decision tree for different kinds of assessment. The first reason that might be useful is if you're new to the area, it might help you. The second reason is if you're in a larger company, some degree of repeatability in choice of tools and methods could be helpful as well. So we classified tools into 4 levels. Hazard identification tools, which were often yes/no checkboxes, as a reminder. And I really like this quote, and I'll give you a moment to read it.
Do you mind if I read it though, Richard?
No, please do.
The identification must be carried out internally by people in the company who know perfectly the work situation, even if they have little qualification in safety, physiology, or ergonomics. These people are the workers themselves, their immediate technical management, the employer itself, and small companies with an internal OHS practitioner, if available, in a medium-sized or large company.
Thank you. Thank you. So the next level we decided that would be useful would be where we have graded responses, perhaps. And as we move ahead, that may even be useful for some tools as a simple risk assessment. Observation analysis, where we actually go in and look at people doing things, and there's timing and there's postures, and some of these methods have scores. And then there's what we call comprehensive or in-depth, and you need to have a fairly good understanding of these methods to get any kind of repeatable and interpretable answers. So, what we call the tool picker then is you decide what you want to have a look at. And it tells you what it's got. So healthcare being important, patient handling. There are two pieces that we found that could be useful to people here in Ontario. So there's that one. For example. What else could we look for? Mobile devices. That's always a good one. So we have two identified there. There's a little tiny piece actually in the CSA Z412 that it does address office ergonomics. But there's another one that's of interest too. So, and where is it? Blah, blah. So Appendix A of this paper is actually the checklist. And obviously that section can grow. We could get to it through the resource library if we wanted. So I just search terms. Let's try mobile. See if it finds it. Okay, so it's found it as a PDF. And obviously we will be adding our videos to this particular resource pool. What else have we got? What's new? Well, it was released yesterday. And so, because in the phraseology it's a living document, we're going to post updates when it happens. We need to be a bit more sophisticated, like an RSS feed or something to alert people if they wish to know. And I would imagine over the next few months, as we pick up speed on the resources, we're going to get a fair amount of change. So the fact sheet that you have with you is available as a PDF there. You can actually go to the risk assessment picker if you really wanted. Success stories. Well, this success stories is a failure. And I've been asking people for these success stories for the last 2 years, and we're not getting any. And so the best case study, I put down 2 case studies there from somewhere else. The point wasn't to shame people into creating them necessarily, but we definitely want to do that. And at the conference yesterday, Bill Roy from the Prevention Office really said to the health and safety groups present that, come on guys, let's put some input in here, success stories and everything. So he gave a call to action for them to follow up on that. And so we do have a case study template. So organizations, case study, so goal, what was done and how, etc., pictures, transferability. So it's a fairly detailed case study. We also ask for stories, 500 words or less in narrative format. But these are the things that we're really after, the case studies. What else on here? Frequently asked questions. So why take action? It's the law. It's the right thing to do. And ergonomics and removing MSD risk factors is good for business. So it's a little bite-sized pieces here. I think that's most of the pieces of the site. It is live, so you can go anytime to msdprevention.com. We welcome your feedback. As I said, it went live yesterday, and we are working to develop it further. Okay, in terms of what are we doing now, we're developing both the control section with a control picker, similar to the tool picker. We're developing the risk assessment and other resources in videos. We're halfway through a quick start guide office, and the approach we're using on that is there's one that we stole with pride, I think is the expression, from Jack Dennerlein in the United States, where he grouped the issues of information technology around three things. Number one is vision, because if you can't see, you're going to move your head to wherever you can see. And so your connection with the visual source drives a huge number of problems. And vision, good vision, is really critical in that too. And so the uncorrected poor eyesight causes people to develop all kinds of compensatory strategies, like leaning into screens, all kinds of stuff. So vision is really critical, and that includes things like getting screens and things in the right place. Support is the next one, which is all stuff about the chair and where you put your hands. And then reach, which is, again, trying to keep things within some reasonable boundaries. And so we're trying to figure out how to make that work within the structure we generated with the Quick Start Guide. So we didn't end up with 20, in some ways, disconnected things. We tried to group them in that. Whether that works or not, we don't know until we test it, but we're working on that. Collect stories and case studies. And the section which we didn't look at dealing with an MSD, is that idea of using parallel processes in work disability prevention. So that there's I won't call it seamless, so that there's at least a transfer into that. And in terms of continued development, obviously user feedback on beta release, and we'll be putting a survey on the site soon. Continuing to convert resources to AODA compliance. And one thing I didn't show, perhaps I should. You go to the bottom of the sheet, we have a click to view page content references. Now that was prompted by a recent paper, actually, in Scandinavian Journal of Work Environment Health by a lot of the more senior folks in the MSD prevention area, where they were saying, be very careful about standards in ergonomics. They're not transparent. Which tools and which checklists get in there, it's not clear. And in general, they don't have good empirical support. And so we're trying to live up to the name of CRE-MSD, of being a Center of Research Expertise, to try and put sources behind all of the pages that we generate. Now, we haven't done that yet, but that will then be bookmarked into different pages. And it's also a good resource if you want to follow up on a topic. But we thought that was important to do. So all I can say is we hope it's a contribution to improving the health of Ontario workers and the profitability of Ontario businesses, because work shouldn't hurt. Thank you.
Thank you. We have about 10 minutes or so for questions, 9 minutes. Are there any questions?
Congratulations, Richard.
Thank you.
You knew this was not a small journey. You started
It has got bigger.
It has got bigger, but congratulations. Congratulations. Are you aware of a comparable resource globally? And I'm referring here to, it's non-proprietary. In other words, you've selected what, in your judgment, is the most useful, accurate, valid set of resources. And it's not hazard specific, so it's not focused on only repetitive motion, it's focused on all that. Are you aware of a resource that's as comprehensive in its scope?
Washington State has got a pretty good...
Perhaps.
Yeah.
The original guideline for
Yeah.
Washington State was really as comprehensive as the Ontario MSD guideline. Yeah.
So,
but it's rare, I think, is my point.
it actually is the model, not necessarily we used, but we looked at, was the Sun Safety website. In terms of, and it seems actually to be a bit of a, based on my limited knowledge, a trend is rather than go for portals, to standalone websites again, in terms of there's the violence, there's the Sun Safety, there's this one within the Canadian context. I don't know if portals never worked very well, but we have had interest in the Quick Start Guide, which I didn't go through, from other places as well. And in terms of the website, some people have picked up the reports that we've generated over the while and are interested in collaborating. I will note that there is a French side to this website. It is a fully bilingual site, and we are starting the French side with our colleagues in Quebec. It's going to be a very different site, a much smaller site, but there will be a French side to it. That's a whole other story.
I've got Linda and then Andrea.
So thank you. This seems like a wonderful resource, and the fact that you've tailored it for your different audiences makes it, I'm sure, all the more usable. And so I have two questions. I guess one is, what do you anticipate about the future in terms of it being maintained with, as new tools become available, et cetera, research studies? And is there a strategy within the Ontario prevention system for disseminating this? I can imagine the Health and Safety Association consultants being able to make use of it and being able to use it in their interactions with workplaces. So they need to be sold on it.
Whole bunch of questions there.
So I guess, that kind of the ongoing maintenance of this wonderful site, and then secondly, kind of dissemination of the prevention system.
Yes, when we started working with the Ministry of Labour, we did get signs that they were interested in keeping this thing going, because right at the beginning we made the point that a website doesn't live on. So the MSD Prevention Guideline from 2005 is as fresh as it was then, in terms of books. And so they realized that, and they were also interested in the idea of continuing to develop it. And so we believe we will have support from the Ministry of Labour as we move forwards, not only to maintain it, but to grow it.
It's a pre-MSD.
Yes,
Within it.
yes, yeah, no, not necessarily me anymore. The other question is that around the dissemination, and we've been working with Ministry of Labour, WSIB, and we're currently generating some stuff to go out, and so we've been working with the Small Business Action Group on this, and have been for the last 2 years. And so they are going to put it in the leaflets and flyers and all those other good things. And we're working with groups such as PEP, the Prevention Employer Partners, who we've been keeping up to date on stuff. And so we have made a concerted effort to do that. And so we have what we call a rollout committee, where we've tried to think about what we'll need to do as we move ahead.
Andrea?
Great work. I really love it. I am a clinician, and I'm planning to show this to my patients who are workers to avoid further issues. But my question and suggestion is more in line with what Linda suggested on the dissemination area. If you thought about social media, because I think you have wonderful materials here for Pinterest, those videos, the pictures. For Facebook, maybe to get your case success stories. Maybe Facebook can be a good portal for you to get case stories. And also Twitter, because Twitter is international, and you might create an audience, international audience driving to your resources. So did you think about social media?
Yes, we are tweeting already. We have a Twitter account, we're tweeting. Facebook and Pinterest were interesting suggestions. I don't use them myself, and so but there is we have a small group of people who are looking at that. I'm a little divorced from that now, but using those social media as ways of getting traffic to the site is going to be important. I should also mention that we've got a full set of analytics on this as well, and so we will be trying to report back on that. And so,
Final question to Devon.
Yeah, so I'm impressed by the different formats, and I'm interested in how well served micro and small businesses are by the different formats. Is there any plan for evaluation of that? So assuming that you get them out to these people.
Yeah. We're going to, the small business has got an earlier version of this. And so next year on the summer student outreach program, we're hoping to get back to the same ones a year later. That's not evaluating the site per se, that's evaluating these materials. And we always thought that perhaps the paper copies of the Quick Start Guide would be of more interest than the website, actually. But you can read it and download these anyway. So, yeah, evaluation, as in everything, is a big challenge. And for the small business, we do have an evaluation scheme of a semi-quantitative nature in place. The rest we're going to be, as I think in most things, coming up with stories and interviews and other evidence of impact that way. But it's an excellent question, and one that's I wish it was easier to answer.
Okay, well, we're right at time, so Richard, thank you again.